Give yourself permission to fail. You're going to make mistakes. Just try not to make the same mistakes twice.
Managing life's transitions requires a blend of resilience, adaptability, and courage, while also embracing vulnerability and the support of strong relationships. And today, we have the pleasure of talking to Mark Greene, a retired Navy SEAL who is very familiar with turning the challenge of transitions into stepping stones towards personal growth and transformation. From a college athlete to dropout, SEAL training to enlisted SEAL, and sniper to civilian, Mark's life has been a roller coaster of adversities and triumphs. Despite the obstacles, Mark found strength in his community and never faced his struggles alone. And through his experiences, Mark has identified 6 predictable phases in any transformation, emphasizing the importance of embracing change with confidence and tenacity. Mark, I'm so honored to have you on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. And I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And now that we're finally doing it, I'm really excited.
I'm really stoked that we were finally able to connect. And as our listeners start up their Strava app and begin tracking their mile, I just want to jump right in your journey from the SEALs to transitioning through the various phases in life. You've demonstrated such resilience and a willingness to embrace change. Would you mind sharing with our listeners how giving yourself permission to fail has played a role in navigating these transitions and ultimately finding strength in your vulnerabilities?
Yes. So so many of my attributes that I have now were really honed when I was a very young child. And through sports, I was really getting frustrated at not being really good right away. And so one of my coaches sat me down and said, everything that I'm good at right now, the first time I did it, I was terrible. And I was like, okay, so in my mind, that made sense that, hey, this is going to take some time because you're brand new at it. And I just said, okay, as you're learning, and I learned this as I was growing up, that as you're learning, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to be an expert. You're not going to be at the level that you'd like to attain right away. And that just kept repeating itself. So when I would try a sport, I had a strong arm, so I could throw a baseball. And then my grandfather said, okay, throw your first pitch. And I was all over the place. I had all the attributes, but I didn't have any skill set. So I was really terrible. And then after a while, I just, through repetition and allowing myself to fail, I took off a lot of the stress of, hey, you have to be exceptional at this thing right now. And when I joined the SEAL teams, I expected to show up at the command and just be in SEAL shape. And that wasn't the case at all. And when I was learning the SEAL skills, I wasn't good at any of those. But over time, we had the crawl, walk, run method. And as high level as we tend to do things, we always start off at the crawl phase of literally just like, okay, we're going to walk through this. We're going to figure it out and talk through it. And then we're going to literally walk through it. And then as we get better at it, then we're going to incorporate everything to where we have the efficiency to go down range real world. And that's the run part of it. So throughout my entire life, at every level, it was, hey, let's slow this thing down. You need to build your expertise. And the only way to do that really and be proficient and to have it stick is to give yourself permission to fail, because you're going to fail on your way to being exceptional. And then aspect of that was being consistent. I think that's the hardest thing about expertise or proficiency is you have to be consistently exceptional. And pick your athlete, Tom Brady, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. They're incrementally better than everybody else, but their consistency really expands that level of expertise, because one guy can get 50 points one night and then he'll never see that performance again. Whereas Michael Jordan was doing it day after day, game after game. And the anomaly was for a bad game, right? So that went through a lot of phases of expertise and giving yourself permission to fail. But then once you achieve that, then the hardest part is to maintain consistency.
There's a lot to unpack in there, and I love some of the illustrations that you brought up. First, starting with throwing a baseball. Like it's such a skilled thing to do. We all possess the ability to throw something. We all do it as kids. Some of us continue to do it into adulthood, and we're like, oh, okay, I should be able to do this, and I should be able to do this just as well as the guy that I see doing it on TV. Uh, However, the reality is those consistent actions really is what builds the skills. I remember this past winter, my wife really wanted to try ice climbing. We were living in Canada for the winter, and she was like, "I really, really want to go ice climbing." We started bouldering and doing wall climbing a few years ago. We've done it for maybe a total of like 8 months at this point in our life, and she's like, "We're going to go ice climbing. We're going to get to the top of that waterfall." And so we tried, and I think we made it like a quarter of the way up, and there's people out there climbing next to us that are having no problem, right? I've never belayed somebody in my life. I didn't know what I was doing to give support. I had never used a rope to hold me to the side of the mountain and like learn how to relax and do things slowly and do that crawl phase. I was like, I'm just going to get to the top of this mountain as quickly as possible. And it was exhausting. And, I don't know when I ever would have had the chance to even practice ice climbing because I live out here in Hawaii for the last 20 years. And I was just like,
Yeah, a lot of snow
of
out
course
there.
I'm going to be good at this. And then you turn around and you talk about like, oh, I'm going to show up in SEAL shape. Well, had you ever been a SEAL before?
No, no, and I just thought that when you show up, you have to be ready to perform at that level. And then I was not disappointed, but I was like, okay, well, this is it. I mean, I didn't do a whole lot today. I'm sore, and it's more than I've ever done, but I'm able to walk at the end of this day. And looking back on it, on by what you have to do in third phase, which is you've been in this program for 6 months. The things you can do in third phase with your mind and your body, are astronomical. It seems like, and then looking back at the class who's just starting, and you see their day, like you guys are the easiest part of this thing because you build up so much um, confidence and competence in what you're doing that looking back on it, it's like, oh man, that was such an easy time in this journey. And when I talk to students, usually at the University of Southern California, usually talking with seniors, and I'm like, just take a moment, close your eyes, and realize what you're capable of in your fourth year, getting ready to graduate, as opposed to when you showed up move-in day and you had your first engineering class or your first calculus class. Fire hose on full blast, so much information, so many different things that you just couldn't process at all. But now you if you went back to your freshman year with what you know now, it'd be one of the easiest things you've ever done because you built up that stamina, you've that muscle memory. You've before not realizing you've given yourself permission to fail. Um, it's just instead of getting all A's, you had to get a B every once in a while as you're figuring this thing out sometimes. And just thinking about that, and I really tell them, give yourself permission to fail. You're going to make mistakes. Just try not to make the same mistakes twice.
You know, I love that you had learned from your dad, as you'd mentioned, giving yourself permission to fail. Like it's essentially saying like, hey, I'm here to learn. And I remember a lot of things came really naturally for me. And so when I did fail, I felt like I failed myself. In your life, like had you had any moments where, you had to overcome that feeling of like, I know that you had mentioned like, oh, I should be good at this. Why aren't I good at this? But like, I know that when I step up to the plate of thinking I'm going to be good at something and I do it poorly, or even starting a new job like I'm doing right now, I'm 60 days into a new job, and nobody's told me I failed, but I feel like my performance is subpar as I'm learning the ropes of this new organization. Was there anything like that, either stepping into the SEAL life or afterwards?
It was. afterwards. And I was doing my interview at the job I work at now, in Richmond, Virginia, at an energy company. And one of the interview questions was, what are you most looking forward to? And I was like, I'm looking forward to struggling through this process because I'm learning a new industry, an industry that I hadn't learned before. I'm learning all these new skill sets, and I'm going to be uncomfortable, and I'm okay walking into this thing knowing there's going to be an incredible level of discomfort. It's going to take me. I want to come in and learn right away, but realistically, it's going to take a year to 2 years to learn everything I need to learn to be proficient at it. So, and the interview was like, I've never heard that before. So you're looking forward to the struggle. I was like, I know it's coming, so I can either fight it or embrace it because it's going to happen. I don't know the energy industry. I don't know this new job that we just created. I've never worked in this environment before, so I'm going to do a great job. Just know that I'm going to struggle for the first 6 months to 2 years. Like, okay, you got the job.
That sounds like a developed mindset spoken from a former SEAL of like, I'm looking for the toughest challenge because I want to grow. Can you like share any specific experiences or lessons from your time as a SEAL that helped influence your journey in mastering transitions like that?
I've really had a really strong support system. So when we show up, the thing is like you're going to do everything in pairs. You're not going to do anything by yourself. And to know that in everything you're going to do, you're going to have the buddy system. And as you're going through Hell Week, and that was the 5th week of training, and it's 120 hours, 5 days. And when you're at your most miserable, you look to the left and you look to the right, and everybody's suffering at the same level that you are, or even greater. And then that's kind of a sense of comfort. You're like, okay, we're all feeling the same. We're all embracing the suck at the same level. So then you're like, okay, well, I'm not alone in this thing. And then as everything we did, team, team, team. So the hardest thing I think was as you're transitioning out and retiring or getting out, the muscles to do things individually have atrophied. You haven't used them in 20 years in my case. I hadn't done anything alone in 20 something years. So all of a sudden you go from this team environment to the individual environment, and you just don't know what you're doing anymore. Or you have to revisit and you have to build that muscle memory up again because, like I said, those muscles have atrophied. You have not done anything by yourself for those 20 years. So I really embraced the team aspect of it, and I played football and basketball throughout my life. So I was always in a team environment. So that was the easy part. The hard part was the individual side of it. And one of the things that they say in the SEAL teams is it's an individual effort to make the team work.
Mm. You know, it sounds like being a part of a team was such an important part of your life growing up into the military. Like, what made you to decide to join the military when you did?
Well, I was a third generation military brat. So my grandfather was in the Army, my dad was in the Air Force, and it was just always an option. And once my football career ended suddenly out of my control, a really great friend of mine said, "Hey, don't worry about it. We're going to go be Navy SEALs once we're out of college." And I was like, "That sounds amazing." Okay, and then he showed this video, and I was hooked. And so it was always not part of my DNA, but it was always a really strong option. And there were just a lot of opportunities that the military offered, and to be to have the opportunity to do something exceptionally special. And I was like, oh, it's another team, maybe another part of another SEAL team. And once that inferno was sparked with a small video, um, I went through some hardships, but once I figured it out and joined the Navy, I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. And what my father really did a great job of instilling is once you start something, there's no quitting because people are relying on you. And in the context of football, he said, if you're a starter or you're coming off the bench or you never play it down, once you start something, there's no quitting. And I think it was 9 at the time.
Oh my goodness, what a lesson to learn.
Yeah, yeah. I blew it. I was like, yeah, okay, Pop, whatever you say. And I start to walk away, and he pulls me back and kneels down and said, I don't think you understand what I just said. And he reiterated it, didn't blink, and he said, we just don't quit once we start something. I was like, yes, sir. And that was the time that I would quit something died when I was 9 years old.
That's so wild, learning that perspective that young, because so much of life is believed to be individualistic, or a lot of people, they want to find the easiest path to their goal or solution in life, and it sounds like, if you had an idea, you were going to follow through with it, and being a part of a group and unity mentality was a big part of it. How did being a part of a SEAL team help continue to shape your perspective on teamwork and perseverance? Because you were also evaluated on an individual level. That's what happens in the military, is that we have annual evals that come out that says this is how you're performing as an individual, but you also need to make sure that the team is doing well.
Yeah, we focused so much on team dynamics that it took a long time to understand that we were also getting evaluated on an individual level. The first time I got my eval or fitness report, um, I didn't quite understand. It's like, how have you observed me individually? Because I'm only doing something with teams, and they walked me through it. So like, okay, that makes sense, but I don't agree with it. But okay, this is the system I'm in, and this is how you're evaluated. And so often those individual evaluations were not correct because they're just taking a snapshot and they focus on whoever the leader is. They have something that they're focusing on, and if you do that one thing or that set of things, then the other 90% of things that you do is invisible because they're not looking for that. So I really, when I had my chance to lead, I really took time to holistically talk to my teammate or my teammates and then the guys I was leading. So when it came to that individual evaluation, I was like, okay, here's what this is about, and here's how you can understand it. Because I learned more from bad examples than I did from good examples because they really stuck. It's like, why did we do that? And I would think, it's like, I'm never doing that. And I really had this book of things to never do as a leader, and and I stuck to most of it. I failed a couple times, but for the most part, I was like, yeah, that was a terrible way to make that decision. And when I get to a leadership position, I don't want to make that same mistake because it could have been catastrophic. Just the strength of the team helped mitigate that situation. But I was like, yeah, we're not doing that.
When people think of the military, they think about the leadership, they think about the teamwork, they think about how hard and grueling it is, especially if you've never been in the military, and especially as a special operator and a Navy SEAL touted to be the best in the world, right? And that comes with a certain amount of physical and mental challenges, especially because one of the things that people also fail to realize is while we have high level leadership, we also have very young, inexperienced level leadership. We're called to do such hard missions, and we know very little about how people are going to respond in the long term. So, like, as an athlete, you push your body until it breaks, or as an operator, you stay up as long as you possibly can in difficult situations. How'd you overcome some of those obstacles?
I really just embraced it. Once I knew what I was getting myself into, then it starts with going through the SEAL training or selection course, but then you always have something that's so grueling that you hear about it and you're like, then you start looking forward to it. Like Hell Week, you're afraid of it, but you're like, okay, this is the obstacle that you have to conquer before you're able to move on to second phase. And then second phase has a daunting obstacle that you have to earn the right go to third phase, and third phase just sucks. So, but it's you're constantly being challenged, and you're constantly breaking through barriers and obstacles, and all of a sudden your perspective changes, and everything is just, hey, how do I outthink this problem so I can win? And that was the biggest takeaway that I took through the military, because you're constantly getting challenged, but then you're constantly striving. You're constantly having these little markers of success, and all of a sudden that builds upon a career. And look back on it, and you're like, man, I had no idea that one was going to make it through budget, then be a SEAL, and then be a sniper, and then become an officer, and go to combat and lead men in combat, and then bring everybody back. And looking back on a 20-year career, I'm like, man, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but just how they build upon successes in the military. They do a really good job of building upon successes, and really challenging you, probably faster than you're ready to do certain things. Like as a 22-year-old going to Iraq for the first time as a butter bar ensign or second lieutenant, and then making combat decisions. I mean, 4 years ago you were in high school, and going to prom, that was your highlight, and all of a sudden you're in a bad situation, and you're put in that situation to thrive in, and you do it, and you figure it out. And I really enjoyed that challenge, because it was a constant challenge, but there was so much growth that I'm not remotely the same person coming out of that experience as I went in really good ways.
Yeah, combat definitely has a way of changing an individual. I know it changed me after my second tour to Iraq, coming back, because it was a different type of operation than I was when I was 20 years old, going over there with a bunch of guys. I went over there with a smaller team, and it was a bit more autonomous being on that team, and I remember that's kind of the one that stuck with me and left some lasting markers throughout my life that still give me some lessons that I learn and I carry with me today. It's one of the reasons that I work so hard to continue to present myself with the highest level of excellence that I can, because I know the cost of freedom. I know the cost that a lot of our service members have paid. And I want to make sure that I'm still continuing to do it justice, because, I really loved my time in, but I didn't necessarily have the best transition when getting out. How was your career kind of leading into your eventual retirement? Like, are there any markers that stand out for you?
Well, I knew that I couldn't do this forever, right? And so I really wanted to put myself in the best position to be marketable and valuable after this career was over. So, having flunked out of college, school was, it was terrifying. But, I finished my bachelor's, and then, I'm like, well, I have this opportunity to go to graduate school. And I was going to take the curriculum that, you do a lot of reading, you do a lot of papers, but it's really there to reconnect with your family. So I thought that that's what I was going to do. But our detailer said, well, how many kids do you have? It's like, 3. I said, oh, no. I'm going to send you to get your MBA. And I'm like, well, no, no, you're not. And she's like, it's going to help you. You're always going to have a job with this degree. It's going to suck, and it's not going to be any fun, but you're going to be able to do it. And you show up in 2 months. So good luck. And at the time, I remember being mad at her. I was like, put me in a position to flunk out of a grad school and learning business and economics and statistics at the graduate level, having I think a sociology degree or criminology degree. So I mean, I wasn't prepared for what I was getting myself into. But she had the wisdom to say, look, you're going to be fine, and this is going to set you up for when you eventually retire. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So that's what I did when I chose to become an officer, I'm like, I need to have this under my belt, this leadership piece, because the enlisted side's great, and I would have loved to stay enlisted the entire time. But realistically, um, becoming an officer was the best decision to make. And then going to um, getting my MBA, and so that set me up for when I retired. Even though I didn't know what I was good at, I had the skill set and the ability. I just didn't know what that looked like.
Yeah, the college pursuit is always a stressful one. I remember I had somebody close to me at one point when I told them my plans were to get out after 5 years and go back to school. Their response was, "I don't think you're going to do very good at school." So when the military kind of told me to make plans, after I sought help for my PTSD and alcohol dependence, school was the thing that I had to go do, and it was one of the most terrifying and exciting times. And I quickly had learned a little bit of what you had talked about of like, if I'm going to make this decision, I've got to stick it through. So like, I'm doing this full time. I'm doing this 4 years. And I'm going through, and it was the most rewarding thing. So much so that I went on to get my master's because I was like, I love education, and like, it's goal oriented. We're growing. It gives you a marketable skill, even though you don't necessarily know how to use the skill. Employers love it, But how did that transition eventually work for you now that you're equipped with an MBA and uh, on your way out as a Navy SEAL officer?
I didn't know what I was good at. I didn't know how being a SEAL translated into where I was going. No matter where that was, I was like, I can't. Saying I was a SEAL sniper, I was like, what does that mean? How does that translate? So you really had to figure out how to translate your skill set to, one, not be scary and terrify the person reading your resume, and let them know that, hey, you have really marketable skills and you have the capacity to learn, and just to market yourself. So I had no marketing. I had, I was a SEAL and that was great, but how do you market that? Or how do you, the hardest thing I had was, you know, letting people know how good I was at something. And I
How
still
do
never
you
mastered that.
market
It's like,
that?
well, are you really good at that? I was like, well, compared to what? There are a lot of SEALs that are a lot better than I was. So, I was kind of average, but it's really like, hey, you have to pump yourself up and let people know how good you are at something. And I've never done a good job at that. I've always kind of downplayed the skill set. So when I talk with people, they're like, why, when we're talking, did you wait to tell me you were still 20 minutes into our conversation? I was like, well, I don't like quiet professional. I just didn't really want to put myself out there and be arrogant and cocky about it. And so I was just like, well, it's part of my journey. It's not the biggest part, but when you're marketing yourself, you have to put your shiniest thing first. And they said, you being a SEAL is the shiniest thing. And which I thought was fine, but I wanted that experience to be a part of the mosaic, but not the biggest part of it. It's like being a SEAL was a part of it, but I have so many other aspects of life and so many life experiences and so many attributes that are really valuable, that being a SEAL gets you a second look, but you still have to perform. And so I really wanted to work on using the SEAL um, experience to get somebody to say, "Oh, well, that's interesting. Let's talk more to this guy about this." And then when we talk, it's now I know how to market myself and really say, "Hey, here's why I'm valuable." But it's always uncomfortable to have that conversation.
I definitely know what you're talking about. Being that shiny lore. I feel like you and I possess a very similar talent of like, you can walk up to somebody with a big smile, and that just makes a great first impression, especially being soft spoken with a big smile, right? And then developing that listening ability. But I know for me, a lot of that humility, a lot of that unsuredness, because I didn't know what I was going to be good at. I couldn't take my enlisted medical training and bring that into the civilian sector. So I had to really consider a completely different career path, nowhere along the lines of there's not necessarily many jobs looking for snipers.
Right.
Um, you know, Was there any point that like I know my mental health really started to take a toll for me when I graduated my undergrad, and I wasn't getting bites on my resume. Like work was not coming. I'm college educated, I'm military experienced, I'm humble, I'm I'm just really struggling because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know why I wanted to go work for certain companies, and like it was almost like a floundering. And for me, like I I I just had to be patient, continue to work through. Was there anything like that for you?
Luckily, no, because I met this wonderful gentleman who just said, "You're my guy, and we're going to make sure you're taken care of." Because I was pressing the easy button, and I was applying for the FBI. It was a government system. I knew how government systems worked. I was more than qualified to do that job. And looking back on it, I was really playing it very safe. I know what boot camps are. Going to the academy is just a boot camp, so I know what that's like. And like I said, I was familiar with the systems, and I knew what to expect. But when the gentleman I met in New York asked me that question, he's like, "Hey, you have an MBA, you've been a SEAL and a SEAL officer. How do you feel?" And I, no kidding, just said, "No, I'm terrified. I don't even know what I'm good at." And he was just absolutely shocked. And then he got a little bit angry. He's like, "No, we're not gonna let this happen." So he flew me out to LA and worked with him for about a week and said, "Hey, look, if I put you behind a desk, I'm going to be doing you a huge disservice." And he's like, "I have my own company, and you're part of the family now. So if you want a job, you have it. But I would really be doing you a disservice." I was like, "Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for the opportunity." And he said, "Hey, I got to go to USC um, to meet the dean of the business school. You want to come with me?" I was like, "Yeah." Well, little did I know that in the week that he and I knew each other, he said he would do great at USC. So we went on campus, and it was graduation week, and I get out of the car and said, "Oh, this would be such a great place to work," and he didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. We had the tour and sent me home the next day. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call and said, "Hey, everything we talked about 2 weeks ago, forget it. I got you 4 interviews at USC." And I'm like, "Well, what am I interviewing for?" He's like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. Just don't suck." And he hung up. So, so that opportunity, I wasn't looking to move to Los Angeles. I wasn't looking at working in academia. But this gentleman said, "Hey, look, well, I'm going to take care of you and make sure that you're going to succeed in this next chapter." And so I did. I show up at USC after the interviews, and it was the absolute best place for me to, one, transition, and two, find a new tribe, which was the hardest thing because I didn't have a mission anymore. I was no longer part of a SEAL team, right? I was Mark on Friday, or I was Mark the Navy SEAL on Friday, and Saturday I'm just Mark, the guy that lives in, they don't know, my neighbors didn't know if I was a banker or a lawyer. They just like, "Oh, well, now I'm just that guy." And the only thing I'm shooting at that point are emails from then on out, right? So it was really challenging. So when I got out to that environment, it was just this huge embrace of, "Hey, you're part of this family now," and that's exactly what I needed.
That's absolutely incredible that your friend was able to lead you to go, hey, Mark, you're probably like you're going to crush this job, but it's probably not going to be the best position for you, and help get you over to something that he felt would really affirm a bit of your identity and give you a little bit of a new mission. But I mean, I know from being out here in Hawaii, going through the transition myself, finding that tribe was definitely one of the harder things to do because for me a long portion of it was civilian people, and I didn't want to talk about my military stuff, kind of like you didn't want to just go out and tell people, "Oh yeah, I'm a SEAL." Like it feels boastful, it also feels unrelatable. to people that don't even have military experience. So how did you go about finding the people that you connected with, and like what did building your new tribe look like at the USC campus?
So it was really interesting that the job that I had when I got out there was very social. And so lots of events, lots of dinners, lots of banquets, and USC is a hub. Their superpower is networking. And hey, I got a guy. That's one of the things. Like, hey, Mark, what are you interested in? I'm interested in this. Like, oh, hold on a second, I got a guy. And it was just constantly just finding things, and some of them worked, and some of them didn't. But it was the first thing they would ask, like, "So when did you graduate?" And I say, "Oh no, I haven't. I just retired from the military. I just work here." And they're like, you're still a Trojan. So it was just one meeting after another, and confidence after another, and then they said, "Hey, we don't have enough work for you right now, so just go find stuff to do." And I was just like, okay. And so I just really just marketed myself, and I was really into athletics. So I happened to meet with a head football coach, and then I met this young man who played tennis, and then I got to mentor the tennis team. And then I was working with a cardiologist, and she was wondering, like, how do you build resilience? And I was talking to a cardiologist who was brilliant in her field, and she's like, "So Mark, what do you think about this?" And I thought I was in the Twilight Zone or something. I was like, "Why are you asking me? I'm just some kid from Ohio who am confident in some things, but not confident in others." And she was like, "I just really value your insight." And just one thing led to another. There's just opportunity after opportunity. And then finally, I'm like, no, I can't stay here forever, because my family was in Virginia, and I knew I had to come back. So I said, so how do I become a Trojan forever? The only option I had was to go to get a diploma, go to school. So then I reapplied to grad school. The first time grad school was awful. And then the program I went to at USC, I was like, it was kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard. I just needed something that was online that would allow me to travel back and forth and still go to school. And the program I picked, I thought was going to be easy. It was one of the hardest. It was the hardest curriculum I've ever taken outside of STEM, and I just got my butt kicked. Yeah. So it was Masters of Public Policy in Government.
Oof.
So we were right behind Harvard's public policy school. So it was next level. So I went from, flunking out of college to now going to grad school at a top 20 university in a program that was in the top 5 in the country. But the cool thing is, once I enrolled and got accepted, then I couldn't quit. So I just figured it out. And looking back on it, I was like, I don't know how I did it, but it was I was so proud of that degree, because it hurt getting it. But, I'm going to be a Trojan forever. And looking back on it, that was outside of having kids and just watching my kids grow, that experience transitioning from military to going into a place where I just had this wonderful, amazing tribe. They embraced me, and had I not gone that route, I would not have survived it. Realistically, I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have made it. But once I found that tribe, and I spent the 4 years out there, and they were some of the greatest 4 years. But had I not had that experience, I wouldn't have had a successful transition.
You have a lot of hard things that you've done. Being a college athlete, being a SEAL, being a sniper, like just being a sniper is a very arduous job. Period. Like, people don't necessarily understand, oh, you just shoot a weapon. It's like, no, getting into position, being still, being there for hours, maintaining your alertness. Like, it's I should have you describe it, because I've only had it described to me. But and then going on and
terrible.
and then going and getting a master's at this level is so incredible. And then, one of the ways that Leanne had discovered you is you then took on the challenge of writing and completing a book. What led you to go, you know what I'm going to do now, because life hasn't been hard enough? I'm going to write a book and try to distribute that.
So I would, when I was at USC, my friend Glenn Fox, he's a professor there, and he had this performance institute, and he would have really big names come in. Pete Carroll came in, Michael Gervais came in, and one day, I want to say it was Kobe was supposed to come in, and he couldn't make it. And I was getting ready to go home for the day, and Glenn called. It's like, Mark, you gotta do me a solid. Can you come and talk with the class? You're going to be our guest speaker. I was like, Glenn, what are you talking about? I was like, well, of course I said yes, but to start that, Michael Gervais was talking to the class, and he did a Q&A, and he was talking about mindfulness and resiliency and stuff. And one kid said, hey, how do special operations guys use mindfulness and mastery? And he's like, funny you should ask. We have one right here. And I'm looking around. I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. There's another special operations guy here, right? And then Michael's like, Mark is going to tell you all about it right after the break. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not ready to talk with this class of 200 people. But it went really well. And that's why Glenn called and was like, Mark, the students really enjoyed your story. I'm sorry to put you in this position, but will you come tell your story to the students? So I did. And at the end of the semester, he did a survey and said, hey, of all the people that talked with the class, who would you want, if you could, who would you want to come back? And like 85% of the class said, we'd love to have Mark come back.
Wow.
Yeah. So every year I go back to USC pro bono and speak with the class. And then finally I met this gentleman named Bob Morgan out in LA. And I would tell him my stories like, Mark, you have such an interesting story. And at this time, SEALs were writing books, and people with very interesting stories are writing books. And I was like, well, their stories are so much more interesting than mine. And so I would really fight him on it. And finally, he called in December and said, okay, I've had enough of you. And he's like, I've gotten you 4 ghostwriters, interview them and pick one, and you're writing a book. And the SEAL in me was like, well, you're not the boss of me. And he's like, no, you need to get this story out. And finally, I'm like, well, okay. And he's like, go write your book. So I got with Shelby and started writing, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to write about. And then as we brainstormed, just transition stories just kept popping up. And every story that I would think about had a transition in it. And some were good and some were challenging and some were just outright seemed insurmountable. And all of a sudden we had, I think, 12 different stories. And Shelby took it from caveman to what you read now. And she really just refined it and added texture to it and depth to it. And one of the same things she said is like, Mark, you're talking to your audience. You're talking at your audience. You're not talking to your audience. So she really just pushed me, and she kept trying to, show me what right looked like. And it just wasn't clicking in the way that I understood. And finally, I woke up at 2 a.m. I was like, I think I got it. So I wrote a story and I presented it to her, and she's like, write every story just like this. And I was like, okay. So then we took it to an editor, and even more depth was added to it. And she pushed me to come up with the 6 pillars of my transition. And so then we're like, okay, it's ready. And as you're doing a book, it's never quite ready, because, this was in like no holds barred. You're reading this book, just about everything about me, good, bad, and ugly. and then your community has to approve of it, because if you write something that's dishonest, SEALs are going to be like, hey, that's wrong. And so I had to be very honest about my SEAL experience, but then I owed it to the reader who's taking the time to buy and read this book, that why should I listen to you about transitions? And this is why, because I had to be completely honest on how some of my transitions were. And that was it. And once Shelby read it and the editor read it, and they were both so proud of it, that's when I was like, okay, well, let's publish it. And the editors and Shelby were like, well, we need a comma here, and I was like, stop changing happy to glad, and you have until Saturday, and when we're done, I'm not going to review it anymore. We're going to get it published on Saturday. So, because we could just keep refining it, and I was like, I need to get this message out. So, you have till Saturday, and so we published on January 22nd. And that's when my social media person, Lexi, she did all the marketing for it. And she had the ideas. She's very creative and said, here's what we need to do. And social media was a thing. I'm like, ugh, I don't even know anything about social media. She's like, Mark, I got it. And I owe so much of the success to my new tribe of writers and publisher and social media expert, because this book would not have been successful without that team supporting me.
Well, first, I want to say congratulations on publishing your book, Unsealed, and the different transitions. And secondly, I don't want to gloss over the fact that this part of your career started because you filled in for Kobe,
mm-hmm.
and the students responded.
Yeah.
Your message, your storytelling ability, and your ability to connect with your audience is on par with one of the latest and greatest performers of our time. That we had the opportunity to witness, and so that's incredible. I've spoken with you now for over an hour prior to the show and to include the show, and you are honestly one of the most humble, non-boastful individuals I've ever spoken to, I feel like. And, I understand why you had a hard time writing your own evals while you were in the Navy and sharing the things that you've done, because it's incredible. What you've done is incredible. It's amazing feats. And so what I would love to provide an opportunity, what I would love to know more about is, can you take a couple of minutes to just outline the 6 phases of transitions that you talk about in your book, because you've gone through so much, and I just really want to give you this space to share your hard work.
Okay. Yes. So as I was writing, and I needed something for people to connect with as far as transitioning goes. And to preface this, I was like, I'm an introvert, so this is how I processed this. And as I was going through my transition, I didn't realize I was going through these phases. And then again, my writer and editor kept pushing me. And finally, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I realized that this is what I was doing. So I started out there. So the 6 phases are isolation, indulgence, cocooning, emergence, grief, and resolution. And the isolation part is, I need to process in a vacuum. I need to be by myself and just isolate and just say, okay, this is happening. You're retiring and you're going to be unemployed tomorrow, and you still have to put food on the table. And what are you good at? Where do you want to live? So I just really had to isolate and just really process this. So once I realized where I wanted to live, what I thought I wanted to do, what my skill set was, how I was valuable, and where I could go, I really just gorged myself or indulged on information. And I call it indulgence because it's not always healthy, staying up till all hours of the night, not getting enough sleep, and just taking in as much information as you can, and just kind of gorging yourself on information, just so you can be as prepared as possible for a journey that you don't know what it looks like on the other side. Right. So then I was looking at a butterfly, and I was just fascinated with the butterfly outside my window. I was like, when they go into a cocoon, they really literally transform. They liquefy from their current form, and then they emerge as this amazing butterfly. And then I realized that's what I was doing after I was engorged on all this information. I just really isolated again and just started the transformation process of just cocooning, right? And it was digesting everything and coming up with a game plan. And as I grew stronger and more confident in what I indulged on, and as I was going through this cocooning process, I was like, okay, I'm going to emerge out of this okay. There's going to be a little bit of a struggle, like butterflies can't survive that metamorphosis without the struggle of emerging from it, right? So I knew that I was going to struggle, but I was going to come out and emerge much different and better and more ready for what was coming up next. After that cocooning phase, and once I emerged, I was like, okay, well, at that point, I had not really embraced the grief that I felt. I pushed it to the side, and I was at USC, but unfortunately, I was going through a divorce, and I wasn't. PTSD was starting to set in because it was quiet. I had lost so many friends. I was tolerated but not welcome in the SEAL community that I'd given so much to. And I really just had to realize that I'm mourning the loss of the life that I had created for 20 years. I was grieving. I was sad. And I just had to come to grips with that. And finally, after going through all those phases and doing the grieving, and I was just like, okay, I've resolved myself. I've come to the resolution phase. I've gone through all these things, and I've resolved myself to the fact that, hey, you struggled with your transition at some point. Your friends aren't coming back. You're not going to recreate that SEAL locker room ever again. You're not going to be an athlete ever again. But you're going to resolve yourself to what's next. And you're going to be the best Trojan you can be. You're going to be the best grad student you can be. You're going to be the best father you can be, even though you're not married anymore. And that's was the resolution process. So once I went through that, and was like, wow, I went through that. I went through all that as I was transitioning, didn't realize I was going through it. And I didn't go through it sequentially. I would start to isolate, but then life would happen. And then I would grieve the life of, or grieve the death of something. But then I would know that I was retiring. And then I would touch the 6 pillars, but I wouldn't actually go through all of it until retirement forced it on me. And then I just had to go through all of those. And I wasn't ready to be my best until I'd gone through all 6 of those. And this book is a culmination of finally going through all 6 of those in their entirety. And so now here I am.
Thank you for outlining them. I want to camp for just a minute because, when you're talking about the first 4 phases specifically, and I love that you mentioned like they're not sequential, so they can happen at any point during transitions, but they're all different components, right? The first 4 that you had outlined seemed very action oriented. Like this is so much of what we have control over. This is the outward expression. This is us learning new things, developing a plan, preparing for the plan, and then stepping into that for the action. But the things that we're not really taught as humans in general is 1, how to grieve and what to grieve. And then 2, how to not stay stuck in that grief, how to embrace this new life, essentially. These are the types of conversations that I get drawn into a lot with my peers and the people around me, especially when they find out what I do and what I like to talk about. is, they find out that they're hung up on something, or that they're looking for a tool to help get them through something. Whether it was, acknowledging exactly what it was that they lost. For me, it was my 30-year plan in the military. I had given 10 years at the time. The next 20 years, I felt robbed. I felt missing out on all of those opportunities that I had planned for. And now I was forced into this transition, and it took me a long time to come to terms with what that was. And sometimes I still feel the sting. It's just not as great. What was it like for you going through these transitions? Because, I mean, you mentioned the divorce, the separation from the kids, the loss of the teams. How did you go about identifying I need to grieve and then go forward and actually take action on it?
It was when I had to crash. I had to hit my rock bottom to get to that point. And, I was in a new city, not doing well, learning Los Angeles. It's a big, scary place sometimes. I was in a new job that I wasn't good at yet. And I skipped one of my pillars of giving myself time to fail, or permission to fail. Um, and my marriage was falling apart. I wasn't being a good father. I didn't think I was being a good father. And one day I'm just like, well, what? Maybe everything would be better if I just wasn't here anymore, because I felt like a burden, right? Because I wasn't good at anything anymore. I went from this extremely high level of expertise. You say you're a SEAL, and people are like, okay, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. To I wasn't any good at any one thing, and that being a burden crept in. And I had this really amazing friend who I was really struggling, and I gave her a call. She called me and said, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, nope, I'm having a really, really hard time." And she had been in the same position and actually had an attempt, and she survived it. And she's just like, something just told me to give you a call and let you know that we love you around here, and you're valuable. And um, everybody on campus just has Mark Greene stories, and I'm sure your kids, don't see you as a burden as you see yourself. And she's like, so, just make sure you stick around. And she didn't, and finally I was like, I don't know why you called, but thank you. And I have guns in the house. Could you just come over and just get the guns out of the house? I'm going to be fine. But there was that 20 minutes. It was like, I don't want to take a permanent solution to what could most likely be a temporary problem. And so she lived 30 minutes away. And so I walked down to Target, and the walk back was roughly 30 minutes. And as I'm walking in to my apartment, here she's pulling up, and she gives me a hug and says, you're going to be okay. And I told her where the guns were, and she went and grabbed them. And she's like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And it was just that connection point to where somebody else gets it, and you're still valuable, and people still need you, and the world's going to be a much worse place with you not in it. And it lasted for like a 20 minutes to an hour. And then I started what I called a gratitude log. I had this little spiral notebook, and then I just started writing what I was grateful for. And I thought it'd be like 5 or 10 things, and it's like 2 pages worth of stuff. And I was like, well, I can't leave all this behind. And there's just those series of catalysts that says, hey, you're still valuable. You're just going through a rough patch, and we're going to get through it because you still have a team and a community and a tribe that rely on you. So it's time to stick this thing out, and you're not a burden. And so that was the hardest part. That's that 1 hour of not quite despair, but I couldn't grasp onto what made me valuable anymore. And then she called, and I almost didn't answer the phone. And I was like, I don't feel like talking to anybody. So I pick up the phone and the, said the right thing at the right time.
I've got chicken skin. I'm just taking a moment to hear it, because part of this journey, part of what we're responsible for when we have these thoughts, and this is what I tell my wife when those thoughts are upon me, and it's one of the most difficult responsibilities that I carry with me, is when I'm having those hard thoughts, those really destructive, burdensome thoughts. It's so hard to share that with somebody, but it's so necessary and freeing. And if we were just willing to just share that hard thought, and it doesn't even have to be as drastic as I don't want to be around anymore. I had to share that thought with my supervisor the other day, to say, I feel like I'm doing a bad job for you. I know I've only been here for 60 days, but I feel like I'm doing a bad job for you. Nobody's telling me this. I just feel this way. And we were able to address it. We were able to get unstuck. So for you, what have you learned since hitting that rock bottom?
That, there's, I still have a lot to offer. And I have these four amazing kids that I want to see them grow up. And I want them to be proud of their dad, their goofy dad who laughs a little bit too much. Um, but my life really revolves around their success and observing their struggles and saying, "Hey, you know, I hug my kids all the time, and I tell them I'm proud of them all the time. So just in case something happens, that they never have to wonder about that. It's like, hey, was Dad proud of me, or did I do the right thing in this situation, or um, it's yeah, I just really, that gratitude log every day is just, man, I have a lot of great things going on, and I refuse. And during that gratitude log time, I refuse to write anything negative. Nothing negative went into the gratitude log. When you're grateful, starting your day off, it just carries throughout the day. And if you have a low point, which we're all going to have low points, I always have that, those things I'm grateful for.
Yeah, no, the gratitude list is one of the most underrated, underutilized tools. And I know that when we're in a negative headspace, like, it's really hard to do it, which is why it's important to have it on hand to be able to read through, to serve as a reminder. And I love that you mentioned that, we're all going to have hard days. It's true. Like, being resilient, and correct me if I'm wrong, being resilient does not mean that we don't have negative mindsets that ever pop up, but it's that we know how to work through them. We know how to work through the adversities.
Yeah, I learned this at sniper school that, you know, when a target pops up, whatever that target is, you have that moment of like, whoa, this is real, and your heart rate spikes and your breathing increases, but you have to move through that, to do your job and accomplish your mission. So I just take it as my oh crap moment, and how long do I stay there? Is it, do I just touch it and then come back down to normal, or do I get up there and do I stay up there? And I just really figured out ways to just touch that spike and then come back down. And I never, or even the lows, just touch the low and then come back up. So, and I rely, and if you ask me a question, I will answer the question 100% with a 100% honesty. And so I tell people that I know, I was like, don't ask the question if you're afraid of the answer. You ask it, I'm going to answer, and I'm going to be 100% because I learned so much through that honesty. And I've had this best friend since I was 18, and we were just always real with each other. And I learned that from him. I would ask him a question, and he's like, "Well, I wish you hadn't asked that because now I have to answer." And there's so much honesty in that. And so if my kids ask me a question, if anybody asks me something, I'm going to just let you know. I'm going to answer your question, and I love that honesty that people know they're going to get with me.
I love that. I'm gonna ask you a question. I want you to be honest with our listeners. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm I'm doing really exceptionally well. Um, I have a job that I really enjoy. It's not what I thought I was going to be doing, but it's still a great job. And my daughter lives in Europe. My son's getting his engineering degree. My daughter's getting ready to go off to college, and I have a 16-year-old. I have this great dog who's sitting right here. Um, I have a book. I have a TV. We're working on a TV show, and all my relationships are strong. And the only addiction I have is sugar.
That's a tough addiction. Me too.
Oh,
I
man,
got to
it's the
stay away
worst.
from the gummy bears.
It is the absolute worst. But I'm getting ready to take my kids on a cruise, and the things are just. I look back and I'm like, I cannot believe this is what life looks like. You know, because I appreciate how close I came to not making it. So now I'm just like, okay, set your life up to where it's 80 to 90% of what you want. So the 10% that you don't want, you have either like, okay, I'm never going to get the 10%. I'm never going to be a billionaire or a millionaire, most likely. But the 80 or 90% that I have, I'm so grateful for. And so I'm just in this really grateful space, and I have enough support, and I have enough great relationships. So where if I do touch that low again, just coming out of that's either one phone call away or one activity away or something to look forward to. And when I got my kids after the divorce, I planned something on a Thursday. I think it was eat out night on Thursday because one, I didn't know what I was doing as a single parent, and it was challenging for us. And I always wanted them to have something to look forward to. So Thursday, like, ooh, Thursday's eat out night. And they just got so excited about something to look forward to. So I always try to give myself, throughout life, I try to give myself something to look forward to. Either going to the gym the next day or going on a bike ride or going on vacation or whatever it is. I build things throughout the week to look forward to.
It sounds like you've got a really good gratitude list, a really good plan for safety. Uh, you know, within the recovery community, we talk about, we're one step closer to we're closer to our next drink than we are further from our previous drink. Meaning that we have to continue to work on this. And me with suicidal ideations, I have that safety plan ready to rock and roll. I put into practice being open and honest and practicing gratitude. And it sounds like you have a lot of the same things. And, I really appreciate the work that you did in writing Unsealed, a Navy SEAL Guides to Mastering Life's Transitions, and that out of your lowest moment came this great tool that you're passing on to others, because there are so many people within the veteran community, first responder community, and our service members that are still struggling. It's not that they're not resilient. It's not that they don't want to be here. It's that they're in a low moment. And in that low moment, they're making permanent decisions based on temporary moments. Do you currently have a message of hope for those that are amidst a battle?
I wrote this book because the entire family transitions. It's not just a service member. The kids go through it. Your spouse goes through it. Your pets go through it. Everybody goes through this transition thing, and it's often very daunting. Um, but you're just valuable. You have so much to offer still. And I want somebody to take the book and say, hey, dad or mom, what I'm reading in this book is something you're going through. Why don't you read chapter 3? Or why don't you read chapter 5? So on a micro level, I want to touch veterans and really help them at least have one more tool in their toolbox to help with their transition, or at least quantify something, or connect in some way with something that we write. And then and then on the macro level, everybody transitions. Athletes, like I said, we talked earlier. Um, Somebody who owned a business from the ground up and then it gets sold, they're transitioning in some way, or you lose a parent, or you go through a divorce. We always have these transition points, and I really just hope this book is just a catalyst for um, helping you take that first step in your journey towards um, transitioning successfully, and just realize that everybody goes through it. Looking back on life, you've gone through successfully a ton of transitions, and you've done it successfully, and just don't take a permanent solution to a temporary problem, because I've lost so many dear friends to taking their own lives. And one of my biggest fears is that I miss a phone call and I wasn't on the other end because I was their last phone call. And so if the phone rings at anytime after 9, I'm kind of like, oh man, this could be a phone call. So I always pick up, because I just want to hopefully be that call that says, hey, you're valuable, and we still love you around here, and you're valuable, and let's get you the help you need, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time here, sharing your journey, sharing the work that you've done in this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I knew this would be a special podcast from just because we had to go through so many hurdles to make it happen. So thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And for our listeners, remember, you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, available on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.